What is good and welcome back to Chatwin Reacts, and today we've got a fan's guide to American football defense. You guys have been requesting this a lot because of course I've shown my love for the defense of this game, so hopefully I can learn a bit more. Maybe there's some stuff I already know and maybe I'm going to impress myself by knowing a lot more than I thought I did. Now before we get into the video, I am going to put my headphones on, and of course while I'm doing that, if you could be hitting that subscribe button. Let's get going to watching a fan's guide to American football defense. Let's go.
Fan's guide to American football defense.
Hey, this video is about American football defenses. We're going to be talking about the individual positions in a defense, and we're also going to be talking about the...
Sorry, like I said, there'll be pauses when there's graphics on the screen, just so I can kind of just have a quick look. Now, the defensive player that I've watched so far that I'm a big fan of, I think he might be retired. I haven't put the video out to find the answer yet, but Troy Polamalu, I think I'm saying that right. So what position was he? Because I feel like he might have been a defensive back from kind of watching some of the clips, but then he also might be, because he was jumping over as well, wasn't he?
Different defensive formations and different defensive schemes and concepts that you might be seeing when you watch a football game. American football is incredibly complex, and understanding what's happening on the defensive side of the ball could be particularly difficult. There are no rules governing how the defense is allowed to line up on their side of the ball, and defenses are always trying to stay one step ahead of the offense, disguising coverage and switching up how they're defending against different offensive looks. So even though there are standard positions and standard concepts that are good to know if you want to understand what the defense is doing, every play is going to look at least a little bit different. This being said, knowing the basics goes a long way.
A couple quick things before we start.
Before we get started, I just want to say a couple things. The first is that if it's not clear from the title of this video, this is a general overview to the topic of American football defenses. This being said, if you think I've left out a detail or some information that is critical for someone to know if they want to understand football defenses on a basic level, feel free to leave a comment. It's also important to note that this video covers basic defensive concepts as they exist in the NFL and at the highest levels of college football. We'll talk about this a little bit more later in the video when it comes up.
Defensive positions.
A football defense has 11 players, and these 11 players are generally divided into three groups. You have the defensive line, you have the defensive backs, and you have the linebackers. The defensive line is comprised of the largest members of the defense usually, and their job generally is to disrupt the play at the line of scrimmage and to put pressure on the quarterback. The defensive backs are generally the most athletic players on the defense. Like, it's not uncommon for them to be multi-sport athletes, like maybe they ran track in college or something like that. And their default roles are to defend against passing plays and to be like the last line of defense against the offense. Then you have the linebackers, who are and to be like
this isn't me learning about defense, but I love how he's celebrating
against the offense. Then you have the linebackers, who are kind of like a hybrid between the two groups that we just talked about. Maybe on one play, a linebacker will be joining the defensive line in run defense, or maybe the linebacker will be blitzing the quarterback. And then maybe on the next play, the same linebacker will be going out into pass coverage, or will be covering the middle of the field in some sort of zone defensive scheme. These groups can be further divided into specific positions. So on the defensive line, you have the defensive ends, who line up at the end of the line and are often the team's primary pass rushers, and the defensive tackles, who are ideally the most physically imposing and most disruptive players on the field.
11, though,
in defensive formations that use an odd number of defensive linemen, that center defensive tackle is called the nose tackle. And a nose tackle needs to be especially large and powerful because they often have to take on multiple offensive players at the same time. Within the defensive backs, you have the cornerbacks, whose primary role is to defend against passing plays, and these are the players that are usually assigned to wide receivers in man-to-man coverage. And then you have the safeties, who usually line up deeper in the backfield, and each of these safeties has their own role. There's the strong safety and the free safety. The strong safety tends to line up closer to the line of scrimmage than the free safety. The strong safety will have a variety of responsibilities throughout a game. Most commonly, the strong safety is the defensive player that is assigned to the tight end in man-to-man coverage. But this is far from a rule. The strong safety might instead be assigned to some deep coverage in a zone scheme, or might line up closer to the line of scrimmage to help with the run. They might even be blitzing. And then the free safety lines up farther back, frequently off screen, like you frequently do not see the free safety if you're watching on TV. And the free safety's job is to go wherever is needed in order to stop whatever the offense is trying to do. And by beginning the play as far back as they do, the free safeties also act as that last line of defense, damage control, defender. And then with the linebackers, you can divide them into the outside linebackers and the middle linebackers. And again, the role of each linebacker will change from play to play based on the defensive scheme and the skill set of the individual linebacker. Because most teams' base defense has some combination of 7 linebackers and linemen, the linebackers and linemen are generally referred together as the front 7. And the area on the field that they inhabit is called the box. This is in contrast to the defensive backs, who are sometimes referred to as the secondary, and the area of the field that they kind of patrol and inhabit is also known as the secondary and sometimes the defensive backfield.
Basic defensive formations.
Most American football teams have what is
this is
called
what
their
I'm-
base defense. And a team's base defense is usually described by the arrangement of the linemen and linebackers. For example, in a 5-2 defense, there are 5 linemen and 2 linebackers. In a 4-3 defense, there are 4 linemen and 3 linebackers. And then in a 3-4 defense, there are 3 linemen and 4 linebackers. For the purposes of keeping things consistent for this video, anytime I show a diagram, it will be of a 4-3 defense, or it will be assuming that the team has a 4-3 base defense. So one with...
But surely you're going to be chopping and changing almost for every play, depending how it kind of seems the offensive line, the other team are lining up. Surely, right? If you're kind of seeing that looks like it's going to be a pass play, you're going to have a different base, I'm imagining.
4 linemen, 3 linebackers,
Surely.
and 4 defensive backs. In addition to their base defense, teams will employ a number of situational formations over the course of a game. These are sometimes called different packages, especially if it involves shuffling players on and off the bench. One common package that you'll see many times in every game is the nickel package. In the nickel package, one member of the front 7, and it's almost always a linebacker, is replaced with a 5th defensive back. Right? It's called the nickel because there are now 5 defensive backs. And the player that comes in as that 5th defensive back is usually called the nickel back, or the nickel corner, or sometimes the slot corner, because they generally will be covering the slot receiver. This is one of those cases where overlapping terminology and synonyms might be confusing. The nickel package is generally used when the defense expects the offense to throw the ball. An example of this is if the offense is using 3 wide receivers on a play. In situations like this, a defense will often go into its nickel package to have that extra defensive back on the field to cover that 3rd wide receiver or to cover what they think is going to be a passing play. You might also see a defense bring out their dime package. This is where you bring out a 5th and 6th defensive back, right? Because a dime is 2 nickels. And then in extreme types of situations where the offense needs to get a ton of yards in the air, you might see the defense bring out what's sometimes called the quarter package or the prevent defense, where you've got 7 defensive backs on the field. Again, these are all packages that a defense might use to defend against the pass. In a situation where the defense expects the offense to run the
I was about to say, and I can see it clearly there, 4th and 19. If they're going for it, they're going to have to pass. So you'd only leave 1 or 2 in the middle to kind of potential run if they... So it'd be quite hard to be a coordinator, surely. Like, you're like, oh, we could run here, but looking how they're lining up, changing plays on the fly.
The ball, they might instead stack the box with 8 players for a defensive arrangement that
I mean, it's
is
not
frequently
confusing,
called
but it
8
is at the
in
same
box.
time.
In this arrangement, it's most common for the strong safety to be that 8th defender up front, but this is not a rule. This is a defensive arrangement that might make it difficult for the offense to run the ball, but because there are only 3 players in the secondary, if the offense is able to penetrate the defense, or if they're able to complete a pass that avoids the congestion in the middle, there's the potential for the defense to give up a ton of yardage when they're using this type of formation.
Which is what I was
All right,
meaning,
so we just
yeah.
covered some basic defensive formations and alignments that you're going to see. There
You
are a
could have made
couple
up
more
that
things to
19
cover in
yards
this
of a run,
section.
because
First,
all
let's
that
go back to the nickel
down far,
package.
yeah.
Traditionally, the nickel package has been a situational defensive formation that a team might roll out to defend against the pass. However, over the past decade or so, there has been a strong trend towards teams using the nickel formation as their base defense, and this is in response to the pass-heavy offenses that have become popular in the NFL and in college football over the past decade. For example, as of the 2022 football season, the Buffalo Bills run a base nickel defense. So their base defense has 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. So in a situation like this, that fifth defensive back, that nickel back, is actually a core member of the defense and is not just the fifth defensive back on the depth chart who comes off the bench in certain situations. By the way, fifth defensive back on the depth chart is the most difficult thing I've ever said in my life. Try
Fifth defensive back on the depth. Yeah,
saying that 5 times fast.
Fifth
A variation
defensive back
on
on the
this
depth
base nickel idea is the 3-3 stack, also known as the 3-3-5. In this base formation, you've got 6 in the box by default, and they're arranged in 2 rows of 3. And then you've got your 5
That's like my
defensive backs.
go-to,
The 3-3 stack has become popular
formation
at
of
the college
Football
level
Manager
in the
on the
past
West
few
Ham
years as a way to have a flexible defensive formation that could defend against the run and the pass, and that does not require 4 quality defensive linemen, which are ultimately harder to come by at the college level. Defenders in the 3-3-5 scheme often have roles that are hybrids of the more traditional roles, and the individual defensive positions might even be referred to by new names. All right, now that we've talked about the basic defensive positions and formations, let's talk about a couple other concepts that you'll want to know.
The Blitz.
On the majority of plays, the defense will have 4 players whose role is to disrupt the play at the line of scrimmage and put pressure on the quarterback. A blitz is a play where the defense sends 1 or more additional players to pressure the quarterback.
to get
Any
the sack.
defensive player can be involved in a blitz. It's usually 1 or more of the linebackers, but it can be a cornerback or even the free safety. The idea
again,
behind
this
a
could
blitz is you're
backfire.
trying to force the quarterback to have to make a quick decision, and you might even get a sack or a turnover out of it. The gamble, of course, is that if you're going to commit 1 or more extra players to the pass rush, you have fewer defenders who are in a position to defend midfield and or downfield.
Basic pass coverage concepts.
There's 2 basic types of pass
So the
coverage
blitz
concepts.
you'd only kind of whack out if it's like, look, we need to try and force a turnover here, or we need to make them lose some yardage. It's not something you want to keep running because they'd fuck you over for that.
Concepts in American football. There's
a lot of thinking
man-to-man
involved in
coverage,
this.
which is frequently just called man coverage, and there's zone coverage. These 2 concepts are exactly what they sound like. In man-to-man coverage, individual defensive players are assigned a specific member of the offense to cover. So it's their job to keep track of where they are, to try to disrupt their route, and to try to beat them to the ball if the ball is being thrown to them. In zone coverage, individual defensive players are assigned an area of the field to cover. Zone coverages can look a lot of different ways, and teams are always going to be mixing up what the zones look like and which players are covering which zones. It should be said now that a pure man-to-man setup where every pass defender is assigned a receiver is uncommon. And this is because this type of setup leaves you susceptible to big plays. What's more common, and this is true whether the defense is playing man-to-man defense or zone defense, is for 1 or more of the defensive backs to be assigned a deep zone. In this example, we see a nickel defense where 3 of the cornerbacks and 1 of the linebackers are in man-to-man coverage, and we can see the 2 safeties are in the back in a deep zone. There are a few different ways in which this concept is described, and you'll often hear it referred to as the defensive
So that
shell.
one makes the most
and the
sense,
shell
I've gotta
is most
say.
commonly described by the word cover, followed by the number of defensive backs that are committed to deep zone coverage. In a cover 0 scheme, there is no player specifically assigned to deep coverage. In a cover 1 scheme, there's 1 player who is responsible for deep
So cover
coverage,
2,
and it's
okay.
usually the free safety. In a cover 2 scheme, there are 2 players who are assigned to deep coverage, and it's usually the safety tandem. So the strong safety and the free safety will both take half of the deep portion of the field. And then with a cover 3 and a cover 4, you are getting the cornerbacks involved in the defensive shell. There are other terms to describe this concept.
So I'm guessing you would, like I said, then you'd have a 4 if they really needed to pass because they were 4 and 18 or something.
saying, for example, cover 2, you might hear an analyst say that a team is in a 2-deep shell or a 2-high set or something like that. And these all basically mean the same thing. A team might also run what's called a Tampa 2, which involves a 2-high shell that the middle linebacker will join in a passing situation. All right, that's everything we're going to cover in this video. We covered the basic defensive positions and the most common formations and gave an overview of a couple basic concepts that you'll need to know as a fan if you want to understand what's happening on the defensive side of the ball. As I said earlier, the information in this video mostly applies to defenses at the professional level and at the highest levels of college football. With youth football and like high school football and college football more generally, there's a lot more variation in the way that the defenses are run and set up. So if you go to a local youth football game or like a high school game and you see that they have, for example, 6 players on their defensive line, I don't want you to think that what they're doing is wrong. That type of defensive line is just no longer standard practice at the highest levels of football. If this video has left you with any questions, or if you think that I have left out some essential information, feel free to leave a comment. Also, take a look at the description of this video. I have included a bunch of links that should serve as starting points if there's a topic in this video that you want to explore in more depth. Also, if you are a person who is knowledgeable about football, feel free to answer or address any of the questions that come up in the comments. The comment sections under my videos have been overwhelmingly positive and respectful.
I think that's where I'm
just
going to
ask that
spend
you
some
keep it
time
that way.
now.
After a few weeks, I'll pin a comment with a compilation of the things that I may have missed or left out, and also with answers to questions that people have had.
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely going to have to check out his comments of his video. I have a couple questions. Look, I kind of went into it. I think I'm going to write stuff down, and I'm going to be honest. I wrote down 11 players, and that's it. Like, I think I'm going to have to watch more games, especially when the season starts again, which is quite a while, I think, actually. So, but more highlights to really get a better understanding. But like I said, this is just kind of the basic, and I've learned a little bit. I've learned more about kind of the formations of why they'll be lining up the way. And it did answer the one big question I did have, which is why do they take so long to get plays going? It's because obviously they're just talking tactically. Right, looks like they're going to pass, so we're going to go like this. We're going to go like this. It makes a bit more sense now, and we definitely have to check out more kind of learning videos like this. Let me know in the comments. Is there any kind of things you want me to know? Any other things I should be checking out? And of course, let me know in the comments your favourite player. My favourite player so far is Troy Polamalu, which I've absolutely just butchered, and I know it. And I'll be checking out their highlights as well. Hope you all have a great day. Peace.